Welcome to Death by Disney. I'm your host, Adam, and I take you on a journey through every single Disney film in chronological order. And yeah, that's the premise of this movie. I can watch, premise of this podcast. The premise of the podcast is that I will watch all Disney movies. I don't have to do it chronologically, but the reviews that I do on the podcast need to be released chronologically. So that brings us to 1956, Westward Ho, The Wagons, directed by William Bodine, written by Thomas W. Blackburn and Mary Jane Carr. It stars Fess Parker, Kathleen Crowley, and Jeff York. And this is like the peak of, I wouldn't say Fess Parker mania because I don't think it was, although there was a lot of David Crockett mania. So Parker is the actor who portrayed Davy Crockett in the TV show that Disney produced, and it was certainly very popular, and that led Disney to putting him in multiple different Western themed movies. I think this is not the first one I've seen with him. Or, yeah, I think I can't talk about that one because it's coming later. So, what is the story of this film? Wagon Master James Stephen leads a wagon trail of settlers, including his wife and children, across the vast plains. Prominent among the settlers is Doc Grayson, who, though not really a doctor, provides what medical care he can to the travelers. The wagon train is beset by Pawnees, determined to make off with the horses. A later encounter with presumably friendly Sioux takes a dark turn when the son of the chief appears to be dying, and only Doc Grayson can help. So, a little bit of a peek behind the curtains. Usually I sit down and write my thoughts about these movies, and I read what I wrote, and sometimes that review is like a year or two old because this podcast is a big project. But I watched the movie yesterday, and I don't want to write anything because I think there's actually not that much to say. The first thing is that I think some of the shots would have looked great in the theater when it came out, but I don't know if it was the copy that I was watching, and this happens a lot with Technicolor. It kind of gets muddy if it's not the original print. Like if it's copied and copied and copied, it gets more and more muddy. So the colors look really, really faded. Although I think if you can find a more original print of the film, it probably looks really, really great color-wise, background, and everything. The actual story is very strange if you think about it. If you permit me to be a little bit political, basically what you have is the story of immigrants going through a foreign land and taking the land from the people that live there, right? I remember a few years ago there was this controversy about this supposed immigrant caravan that was moving its way towards the United States, and people were like, call out the army, do all of that. And it's kind of ironic that that's how the how the West was actually won, was through that tactics, and maybe that's why certain subset of white Americans is like, no, 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 we can't have any more immigration because we want to keep it exactly the way we wanted it when we immigrated here. Like it's the big irony that everybody knows about the United States. Like it's a country completely founded on immigration, but somehow now they're anti-immigration. But back to the movie, because the movie is not really about that. So the movie is about this wagon train that's going on the Oregon Trail, and it's destination is Oregon, obviously, and they encounter two groups of Native Americans. One are the Pawnees, and they're portrayed as this like really dehumanizing way. They don't they don't talk much. Um, they they try to steal horses, and there's this like one interesting battle that they have where the Pawnees are showing off how good they are at riding horses, and the main characters, the white characters, are like, well, the Doc character, the played by Fess Parker, is basically like, yeah, we're not gonna win this one. They just want the horses, so let's give them the horses. And this rich guy who wants to make a lot of money from the horses is like, no, no, you can't give them my horses. And it's really weird because it's like, yeah, they're horse thieves, but you're on their land, right? You didn't ask if you could go on their land. You're just like traveling across their land. Like, imagine, if you will, going back to contemporary America, if a band of Mexicans was traveling in a bunch of RVs and not even going on a road because there isn't any roads, was going through different ranch land in America, what do you think would happen now? The same thing that happened then. So it's really weird, but the movie attempts to be sort of progressive because you have the bad Indians, but you also have the good Indians, and I'm using the word that they use. Um, because there's the Sioux, and the Sioux are much more complicated because they are more friendly to the travelers, but there's some kind of like uh, problem because the last caravan that went through. I don't know if you call people on the Oregon Trail caravan. I guess so. The last caravan that went through kind of killed one of their braves. Murdered is the word you're looking for, but so the Sioux are a little bit upset, and then there's this weird plot where the Sioux chief, he he gets this idea that this little white girl is good luck, so he wants to trade a bunch of good horses and things for the white girl, and people are like, "Oh my god, that's horrible. You can't trade a person." Of course you can't trade a person. I mean, I wouldn't I don't think that you should trade people, but why is his way of, because what they're saying basically is like, I understand that they said no, but their arguments were basically like, "You're a pagan, that's horrible, why would you ever do that?" And it's like, guys, at the same time you said no to this, white people were starting to kidnap Native Americans and put them in schools, and that lasted from the time of this movie until the 1970s. So, craziness, is big hypocrisy. I don't really, I don't think actually white Americans really knew that that stuff was going on in 1950 and 1960 and 1970 and the 80s. Probably they still don't know that stuff was going on, but it was. So I can kind of excuse the movie for taking that point of view, but this whole like good Indian, bad Indian, I don't like it. I don't like, it's not just about Native Americans. I also don't like it when they do like, good, like there are like good Mexicans and bad Mexicans. There's good people and bad people. And you just can't say like one group like the Sioux is good and another group like the Pawnee are bad, because, they each have their reasons. And yeah, one thing that was interesting also is I think most of these actors were not Native American. So when they're asked to speak in like Sioux or Lakota, it's something like Lakota, Lakota da ba 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 ba, Lakota ba 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 ba, Lakota ba 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 ba, Lakota ba 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 ba. So, clearly it's made up. I think, there was a movie I watched recently. Maybe it wasn't a movie, it was a TV series, and it was trying to take a modern perspective on these things, and it wasn't exactly about the Oregon Trail. It was about Mormon settlers in Utah, and there was like some battle between the Mormons and like some people who were not Mormons, white people, and they massacred them. I forgot what that's called, but that show is called. But it's so dark and dreary and no humor whatsoever. So I think that you can make a medium where you can try to create a real story without romanticizing any of the details of that time period. And you could treat, like, don't treat Native Americans like the noble savage. Treat them like people. That's the thing I really hate in these kind of movies. You know, it's like the white characters by default are people, and anybody else has to prove that they are people first. So you have the native savage, so that's the Sioux, and then you have the wild savage, the savage of the Pawnees. So it's really strange. Yeah, and I don't know, like, it's kind of weird to put yourself back in the time of the 1950s, and I was thinking about that when I was watching this movie. I was thinking about, like, what was Disney trying to tell people with this film? And it's interesting that westerns were such a big part of culture then, and I think it has to do with some kind of trying to prove that America has always been this very moral nation. But it's interesting that they chose that particular time period because, apart from slavery, it's one of the worst black marks on the American culture. You know, like, it was an aggressive expansion that literally was a genocide that was wiping those people out. And then you have, like, Fess Parker with his guitar singing this song about, like, this heroic white guy who had to run away from the Indians, and he proved himself very brave because he was running away. And then you have a kid who was like, yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing. And, like, what were they trying to prove there? I don't really know, like, what the point of movies like this was, because it talks about an idealized past that never existed. And once, even back then, I'm sure people were like, hey, wait a minute. The Pawnees, that's their land, right? So why, like, I don't know. I don't know. It's very, very strange. Okay, so my opinion, I gave it 3 out of 10 stars. That's my rating for this. I don't think that you need to go back and watch it. It might be interesting to watch a more, like, a better looking version of the film. That might have some positive aspects, but the actual story is not really great. It's like basically bad Indian, good Indian, and the great white man, conquering the West as is his manifest destiny to do so. And I think actually the Oregon Territory was split between the British and the Americans. And so it's not actually like the Americans had any right to be there more than, I mean, no one really had any right to be there, but any more than the British, right? So Canadians could have done this Oregon Trail thing, but they didn't. Anyway, so basically in these episodes, I give you some trivia, I give you my review, and I give you what I was called the voice of the people, where I give you a bad review and a good review. First, the trivia, because I think it's kind of interesting. So, Yakima Canute, who was working on this film, wanted to explode one of the wagons for an exciting scene, but Walt Disney told him the settlers wouldn't be carrying that much gunpowder. I mean, true. Disney also stated that Fess Parker would get a kiss from his co-star Kathleen Crowley, but not too much because the kids would resent it. So yeah, this movie also completely directed towards children. There's a lot of things that there was one. Disney wanted the attack on the wagon train to be less violent because kids were watching it, and they filmed it that way. And he was like, "Oh no, this is not interesting." So they refilmed it. All right, so here there's only 7 reviews on IMDb of this movie, and the lowest is 5. So basically, if I had written something, it would have been lower than that, and the highest I think is 8. So here is the lower one. Ringle Wrangle, and it's 5 out of 10 stars. Ringle Wrangle, it's another ho-hum Disney Western. Fess Parker is his usual stolid self leading a wagon train to Oregon, crossing paths with the bloodthirsty Pawnee tribe. Fans were attracted to Parker's workmanlike acting style and amiable, almost shy personality. He's a headliner simply by default. This Disney film has nice outdoor scenery, some strong scenes of survival, and a good supporting cast, including hammy, amusing Sebastian Cabot and a few musketeers. Otherwise, it's a formula-bound, banal sagebrush saga. B-grade director William Bodine does his usual anonymous work behind the camera. Tom Blackburn adapted his screenplay from Mary Carr's book, Children of the Covered Wagon, also the film's pre-production title. And that is from Moonspinner 55. And I would say, yeah, it's actually kind of boring except for one scene. The outdoor scenery is good, and Sebastian Cabot is pretty good as the French owner or director of Fort Laramie. He does a good job, and he's very French. So it's kind of nice that they show that not everybody in the American West was American. Like, not all the white people were Americans. And I don't know why. Like, it's interesting, Fess Parker. Like, why was he such a big star? Because basically he has the personality of a James Stewart, but not the charisma, if that makes any sense. So you can tell that James Stewart was like a big movie star, had this calm sort of demeanor. So I guess maybe that's why Fess Parker also at the same time was a movie star. Because that's another interesting question. Like, why do we pick certain stars to be famous at certain moments? Like, right now we can say that there's this MCU, so most of the famous actors are from that. But then you have people who are outside of it, but also famous, like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise. But those people are getting fewer and fewer, actually. Okay. Now, that was the negative review. Here's the positive review. It's 8 out of 10. Looking Westward in 1956. It's 1956, and Fess Parker's acting career is at its peak, fresh after playing the lead role of Disney's surprise hit Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. In 1956, kids like myself were literally begging their parents to buy them a fake but serviceable Davy Crockett raccoon skin hat, complete with a tail at the back. Along with a cap, if you also owned a Red Ryder BB gun, I didn't, you would achieve the kids' holy grail of popular 50s Western TV and film. In Westward Ho, The Wagons, an odd title for sure, Walt Disney tosses cowboys, Indians, and Fess Parker into an appetizing mix. But does this recipe work, or is this just another film we hoped would be better? I think it works. It's simple, and the going is slow-paced as we watch John Doc Grayson lead a wagon train of families to the Oregon Territory in the year 1846. good and bad Native Americans appear. There are songs to be sung. Certain conflicts arise. And essentially, we're offered a 90-minute glimpse of what life must have been like for the hopeful white settlers and the Native Americans who were already quite happy and settled. I'll get back to that because, whoa boy, in the good old West. It's a simple plot with little excess fat. 5 years after its film debut, Westward Ho, The Wagons was shown in two parts on the Disneyland TV show. Walt probably had planned it this way. He wasn't fond of accidental marketing. This 1956 film has a few tense and politically uncomfortable moments, especially the portrayals of Native Americans. But to Walt's credit, several Native Americans were cast in the film, and Disney consciously made an effort to emphasize the Native customs. Like many Disney feature films, this movie resides in its own category, and it would be unfair, as some reviewers have done, to criticize it because of its political incorrectness. This is classic Disney, a film that parents can comfortably watch with their children without having to keep a finger on the mute button for fear of unsavory dialogue. Enjoy this movie for what it is and not for what it could have been. It plays as well in 2021 as it did in 1956, and that's from I don't know. Sunfix from 2021. Yeah. Let's just talk about a few the things like, what do you mean the Native Americans were already quite happy and settled? Like that suggests it just suggests that that everything that happened in the Old West with the genocide of the Native Americans, that was just the Native Americans deciding that they didn't want their way of life anymore and that they'd much rather settle down and build a civilization with the Americans, which is the myth, right? And that's not true at all. Like, quite happy and settled, like, yeah, quite happy and settled on a reservation. Yeah, because you took all our land. Like, that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing. But to be fair, I can see somebody who was a child in 1956 really believing that, because they watched these kind of things, complete cultural propaganda. And, I think people who are interested in the topic would do a little bit more research and find out that things were not so nice. But Americans have this huge blind spot about Native Americans because it proves that the white culture of Americans, they're the immigrants, right? That's the blind spot. But what about the other things about this political correctness? I don't think the problem is that this movie is politically incorrect. I think, for example, Peter Pan has Injuns, in quotation marks, and it's much more offensive than this is. I think that you can see that there is a kind of genuine attempt to treat some Native Americans like people, but it's the good Indians, right? So it's not politically correct by any means, but I think that it's a first step to kind of understanding the real history of, like, America. And I don't think that this portrays the real history of America. I don't know. I don't like Westerns very much, so I can't really tell you if there is a better version of this story out there about the Oregon Trail. But I think it is kind of fascinating, right? Like, that there was this time period where people were just getting on wagons and hoping that they could make it to this promised land. So I think if you had a movie where people, like the people in the caravan were people and people who they met on the way were people, That would be great as well. And I guess the Donner Party was a part of this, right? So if you don't know, the Donner Party is one of the most famous examples of cannibalism in American history, because they got lost in the snow or something. And probably there's lots of movies about that, but about the Oregon Trail generally, uh, I don't know. About the title, there are at least six movies called Westward Ho. So this one is called Westward Ho the Wagons. So that is a weird title. So I don't know. I think it is unsavory, but there are worse things in terms of racism in Disney films. And yeah, I don't know. If you're looking for more modern perspectives on Native American life, I think, what is that called? Oh, there's a very great series which is called da, 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 da. Reservation Dogs. Um, and it's good because it's from their own perspective. And I think while The Littlest Outlaw is not great in terms of animal abuse, it's actually from Mexican people's perspectives, which was an amazing thing to do in the 1950s in America. So if they had made the movie from Native Americans' perspectives as well, I don't think they would do that in 1956. I'm not even sure they would do that in 2026, to be honest. But if they did, then it would have been better, a better movie. All right, I didn't like it. I gave it 3 out of 10, but maybe let me know what you thought in the comments. And the next movie, I think, is Perry, something like that. So tune in next week for that. Thank you. Bye.